Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room for a Heffy Doodle video. And I have a fun little veggie card to share with you today. I wanted to use some of the previously released Heffy Doodle products along with some of our brand new products like our dies and paper pack. And I'm going to bring in some of my basics as well. So let's start with making our background. I have already die cut some different pieces of cardstock using the Rolling Hills landscape dies. The first is going to be my sky, which I've used Ice Blast, and I'm just trimming apart where the die cut has the different divided parts, and I'm just going to be coloring on the very first or the top part of this die. I'm using Distress Oxide in Tumbled Glass just to add a little bit of color to the bottom part of my die cut, and then I'm also going to use it as splattering. So I squished some ink onto my little make art station here, as well as some liquid pixie dust, and using some water to create a splatter and a paintbrush to splatter that onto the background. And this is just going to give my sky a little bit of fun, some very subtle shine. So I'm going to set that aside to dry and clean up. Next, I've cut out the back hill from the same die set, and this time I'm using butterscotch cardstock, and this is going to be kind of the background portion of my little farm that I'm building. And I'm going to be using Wild Honey as my Distress Oxide for adding some shadow and some splatter as well. So just the same way that I did my top part for my sky, just adding a little bit to the bottom using a blending brush. And then I will go ahead and squish that ink onto my little mat again, grab my water spritzer, and then another paintbrush to splatter that onto this yellow piece of cardstock. I didn't use any shimmer for this one, but you should add shine wherever you want to on your cards. Here is a look at how that turned out. As you can see, just a nice little subtle background. Maybe it's some corn growing in the distance or some wheat. And now we're going to get to the forefront of our card, which is going to be dirt. And for this, I just used some Kraft cardstock in my stash. And these are the bottom two pieces of that Rolling Hills landscape die set. So I'm going to do the same thing on both of these pieces. I'm using Walnut Stain, Distress Oxide, and a blender brush to add in some of that brown ink to these two pieces. I'm going pretty heavy this time because these are going to be dirt with our little veggies popping up out of it. So really want it to have that dirt feel. And instead of using the Oxide, I'm going to bring in the Distress ink in Walnut Stain and put that onto my mat with some water, and I'm going to splatter that down. Now I like to add in some white ink when it comes to things like the ocean or dirt because there are some of that kind of pebbly soil in our dirt. And I normally put the white ink onto a piece of acetate or a clear block and repeat myself. So use my water sprayer and a paintbrush to splatter that down, but I was adventurous today, I guess, and I splattered it right onto my brown cardstock, and it created really large blobs that I did not want. So I used a paper towel to kind of pick up that ink and then stamp that ink in other spots to kind of spread out some of that white ink. But it looks like, in my opinion, a bird came to visit our vegetables and left behind some unwanted things. So in order to kind of cover that up, I'm bringing some more brown ink, and then I'm just going to be very strategic when I place my vegetables and my sentiment later on in the card to kind of hide some of those larger spots that I wasn't super thrilled about, but I don't think it looks bad. It just, my mind went where I didn't want it to go. So I'm going to try to hide some of those larger spots. So now I have an A2 piece of Kraft cardstock, and I'm layering all of my pieces together since I cut them apart. And I'm going to start with my blue sky, and I'm using my Glue-Bert to add some liquid adhesive, and I'm gluing that to the top of this, again, A2 size piece of Kraft cardstock. And I'm going to make sure those corners are really nice and snug down, and then I will move on to layering the rest. So I'm going to do the yellow and the very top small piece of my dirt, and my bottom piece of dirt I'm going to pop up using my foam strips. So I have a little bit left here on this pack, so I'm going to grab the foam strip and adhere it to the bottom of my dirt. And then to add stability, I'll take that next piece and kind of angle it enough to where I can still tuck my veggies behind, no issues, but add more stability behind this die cut piece. I'll peel up the release paper and add that to the bottom part of this A2. As you can see, everything layered really nicely as intended by the die cut. So now I want to figure out where my veggies are going to go, and this time I'm going to bring out some thinner foam squares, and these are great for layering. So you can have two different dimensions on your cards. You have your Heffy Doodle foam tape for the highest part, and then I'm going to use these foam squares as kind of a medium in between my soil and then my background soil. So making sure that I'm happy with all my veggies placed, I'm going to use my Thanks die just to kind of see where that is going to go when I die cut it out later. And then also thinking about where my sentiment will go on the bottom. So now I could start layering in my veggies. So I am using those thinner foam squares, and I'm going to layer up behind this first carrot. I will peel off all of the release paper, and then I will tuck it in behind the dirt, kind of where I've already had it placed when I was doing my dry run of my layout. I'll repeat this process for all of the veggies except for that front squash, so just my onions, my carrots, and my back squash. And once that's done, I can add my sentiment. So I stamped the Love You Veggie Much on some scrap Kraft cardstock in some brown ink, and then I'm going to layer that sentiment along with this other gourd on the top part of my soil. So adhering my gourd to the left there, so it's next to the carrot. And then I'm going to center my sentiment, again using that Bluebird glue. I'm going to use my grid mat to help me with centering. So once I get that glue on, I'm going to center my card on the grid mat, and that way I can center my sentiment on the bottom. And as you can see, the placement of my veggies and my sentiment, I covered up most of that white splatter, which I'm very happy about. Next, I noticed that my gourd needed a little more support, so I took another piece of that Heffy Doodle foam strips, and I'm trying to trim it down so it fits nicely behind my gourd so you can't see it, but also gives that stability. Now let's move on to our larger sentiment. I'm going to grab my brand new summer holiday pattern 6x6 paper pad. As you can see, I've been loving it for this thanks sentiment. And I'm actually going to die cut this blue polka dot paper with the background, the shadow portion of the die. So I've trimmed it so that way the die will fit perfectly onto my cute little Heffy Doodle die cut machine. And I'm going to use some of my Heffy Doodle tape to keep that die in place and run it through my machine. Now, I absolutely love this machine. It cuts perfectly. It's so great and handy just to keep on your desk. As you can see, that popped out easily, very easily. Next, I'm going to grab some white scrap paper and then use the actual word of thanks this time. Repeating that same process, using my tape to help keep it in place and running it through my little die cut machine. And as you'll see as well, it just pops out so easily. I love it. Now let's layer these two together. Again, grabbing that Glubert, and I'm going to add some adhesive behind the white thanks and layer it onto my pattern paper. And then I will also use that Glubert to glue the pattern paper to my card base. I thought about popping it up, but I wanted it to be in the background, kind of behind the veggies. So just gluing it down with some liquid adhesive worked out perfectly. Once everything is glued down, I'm going to grab a piece of sturdy cardstock to create my card base. This time it's an A2 side folding since it's going to be a landscape direction card, and I just used a scoring tool to help crease that fold. And then again, one more time, grabbing my Glubert and gluing this background to my card base. I prefer to have white card bases because it just makes writing a sentiment on the inside a little easier. And applying pressure to all the corners, making sure it's nice and adhered, and that will finish off my card. I hope you enjoyed this little veggie thank you card and that you mix some of these new dies with some of your older stamps as well. Let me know in the comments as well if you would like to see maybe the coloring portion of this card. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!